In this video, I show you how I made the boots and greaves for my Skyrim glass armor set. To start the process off, I wrapped my leg in plastic wrap and tape. After I removed that, I used a marker to kind of draw out the pattern for my greaves. Based on those lines, I cut the tape/plastic wrap pattern out and transferred it to paper, cleaning up the lines and adding any extra area needed. Then I outlined it all in marker so it was easier to see. Afterwards, I began to mark the pattern to indicate what area was what and started sketching details onto the pattern. On the same sheet, I drew a pattern for a buckle detail for the back, only drawing half so I could create symmetrical pieces. Then I began to draw out some of the other detail pieces that would go on the greaves, starting with the fin piece that would go on the outer side of each greave. Then I outlined it in marker using a ruler to get the straight edges. Placing the greave pattern on top of another piece of paper that was folded, I began to draw the shape that would go on the center front of the greaves. Then I cut out all my pieces from my patterns so I could transfer them to foam. For some of the smaller pieces, I went through my collection of 10mm scrap foam to use up bits left from previous projects before pulling out my large foam sheets. I traced the half buckle pattern, leaving the short flat edge open, then flipped the pattern over, joining at the open edge to create the symmetrical buckle decoration. I cut 4 of these buckles and 2 of the fin shapes out of my scrap foam. The spine pieces for the front were a little too large for the scraps I had, so I moved on to my 10mm foam sheet. I wasn't completely sure how the fit would be for my greaves, so I started out by tracing my pattern for one side of one greave onto the foam, adding a little bit of extra material at the back of the leg. Then I flipped it over, meeting at the center, and traced the mirror of the pattern, once again adding extra space at the back. Then I cut it out and wrapped it around my leg to see where I might need material removed to fit better. I cut off the extra material around my heel and tested it out again. This time I noticed that I also needed to remove some of the extra material I had added to the back. Once I was satisfied there, I copied this onto another piece of foam, using the pattern to mark out the center area. Knowing that I needed to remove this center section, I went ahead and cut it out as I cut this greave out. Then I cut that section out for the greave I already had joined together with scissors. After the hollow center was made, I spread contact cement on each side and pressed them together to correct the fit of the greaves. Then it was time to start cleaning up using the rotary tool. I started by going over the seams and then moved on to cleaning up and rounding over the edges. I repeated this process for all the detail pieces as well, especially the buckle details, since they had been cut out quite roughly. For the spine pieces, I used the rotary tool at a bit of an angle to carve a trench down the middle inside so that it would have a better bend later. Then I heat sealed each of the individual pieces, bending the spine shape to heat form it as well. After, I began to apply contact cement to all of the joining edges. For areas that weren't obvious where they would join, I either touched it with the joining piece while it had wet contact cement on it, or traced the top object with my fingernail to mark where to put the contact cement. Once the pieces each had about 5 minutes to set up and become tacky, I joined them together. Before attaching the spine pieces, I tried on a greave to see where the spine would need to sit to cover my kneecap. I gave the greaves a day to sit, then filled in any open seams with a mixture of cornstarch and matte gel medium. After I had sanded down the dried mixture, I used a normal pen to draw on details. Looking at a reference picture and drawing the details directly onto the foam proved to be easier for me for the greaves than trying to transfer them from a pattern I had created. After drawing all the details, I went back outside with my respirator mask and wood burning tool to carve in all the details, following the lines I had drawn. After I burned in all the details, I tried the greaves on with the pair of shoes I planned to use on top of a pair of cheap flip-flops. I prepped these flip-flops to be platforms for my boots by cutting off the straps. Then I began to wrap the base shoe in some vinyl fabric left over from a previous costume. I played around with wrapping it, cutting a piece off and gluing it to the back with E6000 glue. To start off, I had used the same E6000 glue to attach the vinyl fabric to the bottom of the base shoe, but realized I needed something that would adhere more quickly for this section while working. So I turned to hot glue, using the handle of my scissors to press down the fabric to the glue. I continued to use E6000 to attach the fabric to the rubber sides of the shoes. Once I had all of the edges of the shoe wrapped in the vinyl fabric, I started to cut slits and edges in the fabric to wrap around the bottom of the shoe, and secured those sections with hot glue. After all of the shoe was wrapped as needed, I applied E6000 glue all over the top surface of the flip-flop platform and pressed it to the bottom of the base shoe. Since E6000 glue takes about 24 hours to finish curing, I placed a heavy box on top of the shoes and let them sit until that time the next day. Then I added a layer of Plasti Dip to both the shoes and the greaves. After the Plasti Dip had dried, I added a couple of coats of brown paint as a base. I went over the brown base with a layer of gold paint. The result was a little patchy looking. To fix this, I added a second layer of gold paint, which turned out much better. Then to start tarnishing the greaves, I added copper paint to any of the crevices, edges, and random marks. Adding this to any of the random marks helped to make these look more intentional. Remember, there are no mistakes, only design changes. Then I used painter's tape to mask off the areas that would be teal and base them out with a couple layers of gray paint. When the gray paint dried, I added dark teal into the crevices of all these areas, then came back over the surface with a bright teal to allow the dark teal in the crevices to still show through. After that had dried, I went in with interference green paint to give all the teal a pretty shimmery look. I also added extra scratch or shine details with this same paint thickly applied with a very tiny brush in quick back and forth motions. Once all the paint had dried, I added resin to all the teal areas to give it that look of refined malachite from the game. The resin I used takes about 3 days to fully cure, so a day and a half in, I removed the painter's tape from the greaves. Back to the boots, I used the same process to paint the base. I masked off the toe caps and heels to paint the teal areas. Tarnishing on the boots was also applied where the teal and gold areas met. After applying resin to the toe caps and heels, the boots were complete. I did sadly discover that the paint job on the boots did not stand up super well to wear, thus the damage in the final shot. And here's how the final boots and greaves came out. Thanks for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to my channel. If you have any questions about my first foam armor build, feel free to ask me in the comments below. I've created a playlist for my glass armor build worklogs and have linked it on screen as well as in the description box below. Thanks again and have a great day.